They said no human had ever walked into a Neurali's matriarch's private chamber and walked out unchanged. Some never walked out at all. But Amir had already crossed 50 light years to meet his alien girlfriend's mother, and turning back was never really in humanity's nature. Rain hissed against the glassy skin of the skyway as the shuttle dropped toward the city's spire. The capital of the Neurali's empire unfolded beneath him in layers of violet and silver. Towers like crystalline claws reaching up into a storm-streaked sky. Lightning flickered inside the clouds, illuminating whole stretches of the city in pulses of white. Amir's reflection stared back at him in the window, dark hair still flattened from the shuttle's restraints, eyes a little too wide, jaw clenched tight. His palms were damp inside the formal gloves the embassy had given him. They were designed to look neutral, unthreatening, as if knitted fabric could soften what he represented. Behind him, the shuttle's pilot, a Neurali's male with pale lavender skin and opalescent eyes, glanced back. "You still have time to ask for orbital bombardment instead," the pilot said quietly, a hint of dry humor in his tone. Amir managed a breath. "This is just a family dinner." The pilot's frilled ears twitched. "Her mother is High Matriarch Sereth Vel. She commands 3 fleets, negotiates with species that eat their own young, and once stared down a singularity cult. The last person who called meeting her just a dinner was an admiral. He requested a transfer to asteroid mining afterward, voluntarily." The shuttle's landing thrusters roared. The spire's docking platform rose to meet them, a crescent of luminous stones suspended in endless air. As they touched down, the rain broke into mist around them, hanging in the gravity field like drifting glass dust. Amir stood, smoothing the front of his formal jacket. It bore a small silver emblem over his heart, the stylized spiral of the Terran Coalition. It gleamed against the dark fabric like a star. The hatch ear-eyed open. Cool, perfumed air flooded in, carrying the faint scent of ozone and distant flowers. She waited there, just beyond the threshold. Talira's emerald eyes lit when she saw him, her face splitting into that impossible, disarming smile that had started this whole impossible situation. Her skin, a rich amethyst shade, seemed to drink in the ambient light. Her dark hair, tucked back into ceremonial braids, fell over the simple white wrap she wore, a defiant choice, he knew, against the elaborate regalia of her people. "You're late," she said, voice low and musical. "Blame the storm," Amir answered. "The laws of physics are against me. The storm obeys the matriarch's will." The pilot muttered. Talira flicked a glance at him, then stepped forward. For a heartbeat she hesitated, then placed her fingers over Amir's gloved hand, careful, always careful, with all the diplomatic watchers and monitoring drones lurking somewhere in the haze. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, eyes flicking to the camera nodes above the hatch. "Yes," he said, and surprised himself with how steady he sounded. "I do." She searched his face as if trying to memorize every line. "She asked to speak with you alone first. It's tradition for outsiders." He heard the unspoken words: test, judgment, maybe execution. "Finally alone," Talira murmured, echoing the phrase in their language. "That's what she said when she sent the message. It's not hostile, precisely. It means she thinks you're significant." "Significant is better than expendable," Amir replied, most days. Her fingers tightened on his. For just a second her facade slipped and he saw the raw fear there, the war of loyalties. She was heir to the matriarchal line of one of the oldest empires in known space. She had no business loving a human, and yet here they were, drifting on a platform halfway up a storm-crowned spire, about to walk into the heart of an empire that remembered when Earth was still arguing about electricity. "Remember who you are," Talira said. "Not as an envoy, as a human. I don't know how to be anything else." She exhaled, a shiver running through her. That's what she's afraid of. They walked together into the spire. The corridor walls were smooth and iridescent, pulsing faintly with internal life. Sculpted light flowed along them in slow currents, tracing ancestral patterns that told stories he would never fully understand. Soft gravity fields kept the floor perfectly level despite the storm rocking the outside world. Somewhere above, Amir knew millions of Neuralis watched live feeds of this meeting, their quiet curiosity weighing on him like a hand on the back of his neck. Statues watched from alcoves, matriarchs carved in luminous stone, their faces serene and pitiless. Their eyes seemed to follow him. At the end of the corridor, a pair of tall doors waited. They were made of some dark, matte material that swallowed the light around them. Silver glyphs crawled across their surface, shifting, never settling into a pattern a human brain could parse. Talira stopped a few steps short. Her fingers slipped away from his hand. "This is as far as I go," she said. Amir turned to her. "I thought, she's very old," Talira said quickly, not meeting his eyes. "Very proud. If she allows me inside for this, it means she sees me as a child who needs supervision. That would weaken me in front of the clans, in front of the Union." He swallowed. "And if she kills me," Talira's eyes glistened, "then humanity declares war. The coalition fleets array in your orbital paths. Every world you've touched turns its guns on our star." That's what she thinks anyway. That's what all of them think you are, a weapon wrapped in skin, walking politely through their halls. And what do you think? He needed to hear it, needed something solid to hold on to. Talira lifted her chin. I think you're someone who stayed awake all night in the observation deck just to watch a comet skim the rings of Catharis. Someone who argued with my father about the ethics of AI for 6 hours because you couldn't accept a convenient lie. Someone who walked through hard vacuum with a broken suit to get to a damaged shuttle where 3 of my crew were trapped and then apologized for bleeding on the controls. That was mostly my blood. Amir said, you nearly died because you refused to accept that a door labeled sealed meant impossible. Her smile trembled. That's what you are to me, Amir of Earth, not a weapon, a refusal to give up. He held her gaze, drawing in that truth like oxygen, then he nodded once, turned and walked toward the doors. They sensed his approach. Silver glyphs flared, slid aside, the heavy panels parted without a sound. Beyond lay a chamber of shadow and light. He stepped through, the doors closed behind him with a finality that felt like a hatch sealing in a decompression drill. The audience chamber was circular and high, its domed ceiling lost in dimness. Bands of holographic starfields drifted overhead, constellations in slow, solemn motion. The floor was polished dark stone shot through with veins of faint luminescence that pulsed gently, echoing a heartbeat he couldn't hear. At the far side of the circle, a raised platform held a single low seat. It wasn't a throne, not exactly, more like a simple bench grown from the same living stone as the floor. But the woman sitting there radiated more authority than any crown. High Matriarch Saraith Vel watched him approach. She was taller than Talira, her violet skin faded in places to a pale, almost silver hue that spoke of age and lived experience. Scars traced pale lines along one cheek and across the back of her right hand, signs of physical battles in a culture that preferred psychic warfare. Her hair, long and dark streaked with white, fell loose over a robe of muted black that shimmered with embedded star maps. Her eyes, a colder, older green than her daughter's, seemed to reflect whole galaxies. No guards were visible, but Amir could feel the weight of hidden presences. Sensors, drones, perhaps psychic wards. The air itself hummed faintly. She studied him in silence as he walked to the center of the chamber. Tradition demanded 3 paces from the platform. He stopped at exactly 3. Amir bowed, not the deep spine fold of Nerali's subservience, but the simple, respectful inclination of the head that the coalition protocols had drilled into him. He kept his hands at his sides where she could see them. High Matriarch Saraith Vel, he said, thank you for granting me audience. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was low and roughened by time. Remove the translators. He blinked. The tiny buds nestled in his ears hissed softly. Without them, she repeated, if you wish to court my bloodline, you will address me in my own tongue, not through a machine's mimicry. Amir's throat tightened. He had studied Nerali's language for months, drilling its layered syntax and tonal shifts until they haunted his dreams. But diplomatic meetings always allowed for translator assistance, especially for subtleties of honor and insult. This, of course, wasn't a diplomatic meeting, not really. He reached up, plucked out the buds, and slipped them into his pocket. The world snapped into raw sound, the whisper of distant air circulators, the hum of unseen systems, the slow rumble of thunder outside. Sarai's eyes sharpened. Speak. He searched for the right construct, building it carefully in his mind. Nerali's spoken language braided sound with micro-expressions and subtle shifts in posture. Humans could approximate it, but never perfectly. I stand here, he said haltingly in her language, as who I am, not as a fleet, not as a flag, as Amir of Earth, of no noble line, but not ashamed. One of her eyebrows rose. Your accent is atrocious. But there was a faint note of amusement there. Better than most admirals I've eaten for breakfast. He chose to assume that was metaphorical. She leaned forward slightly. Approach. He stepped closer until he could see the fine lines radiating from the corners of her eyes, the faint silvering at her temples. She smelled faintly of ozone and some spice he couldn't name. She lifted a hand. For a moment he thought she would touch his face, but her fingers stopped a centimeter from his skin. Finally alone, she murmured. The words carried a faint psychic echo that pressed against his skull. No admirals watching in orbit, no ambassadors broadcasting this to their councils, no daughters glaring from the doorway. Her lips quirked, just you and me, and the weight of 2 civilizations balanced on the edge of a very sharp knife. She closed her hand into a fist. The chamber lights dimmed. Amir's heartbeat surged. Instantly his body mapped the room, outlets, potential cover, airflow patterns, distances. Training layered itself over fear like armor. If she attacked, he had exactly no chance of survival, but humans were bad at not planning. Sarai's eyes flicked upward. The drifting starfields above rearranged themselves, constellations deforming into a single vast image. Earth, not the stylized symbol he wore on his chest, but a high-resolution scan, clouds and oceans swirling in blue and white over cracked continental plates. Cities glowed faintly along the night side like embers clinging to a log. Your home, Sarai said, 3rd planet of Sol, born an anomaly on the edge of space, shouting into the dark with radio waves and misguided optimism. He said nothing. The view zoomed inward. Wars bloomed and faded across the globe. Nuclear mushrooms rose and dissipated. Megacities grew, fell, changed names. Species vanished. Forests burned, regrew, burned again. You climbed from trees. Sarai said softly. Fought each other with sticks, then metal, then atoms. You scarred your own cradle before you even understood what you were doing. You poisoned your air, boiled your oceans, and still you multiply. Explain this. He frowned. Explain survival. Explain why you did not die, Sarai said. Any sane species would have erased itself, yet you did not. Why? Amir's thoughts flickered to history lessons, the resource wars, the second collapse. The great storms that once drowned whole coastlines, the long, slow grind of recovery, the way people had stubbornly rebuilt cities in floodplains and deserts because they refused to abandon the idea of home. Because we're stubborn, he said finally, feeling his way through the words. Because every time we almost ended, someone somewhere refused to lie down because we had stories about surviving the end of the world before we even knew what the world really was. Stories. The word tasted odd in her mouth. Humans don't just tell them for entertainment, Amir said. We aim ourselves with them. They're how we remember who we want to be when things get bad. Her gaze sharpened. Things are about to get very bad, human. The starfield twisted again. The view zoomed out past Earth, past Sol, past the sparse lattice of human colonies. The Neurali's empire came into view as a web of luminous nodes connected by shimmering lanes. Beyond it, others, the cold geometry of the Calyx conclave, the insectile sprawl of the Atren swarm, the scattered ember clusters of minor polities. Then a new color, a spreading smear of dark red at the fringe where human space brushed against unclaimed void. Sarai's fingers flickered and the red stain expanded, tendrils reaching toward coalition worlds and Neurali's border systems alike. Something wakes beyond your frontier, she said. Our scouts call it the Harrow. We do not yet know if it is a species, a machine, or a god with a grudge. We know only that it devours stars, stations, ships. It has consumed 3 of our listening posts and an entire Atren swarmling cluster, and the pattern of its advance leads here. The red tendrils curled toward Sol. Amir's throat went dry. Humanity had heard whispers, of course, distorted distress calls, vanishing survey craft, rumors of unknown signatures at the edge of the deep. But no one had connected the dots like this. You called me here to tell me this, he asked. I called you here, Sarai said, to decide whether your species is worth saving. For a heartbeat, the room felt very small. She held up her hand and a second image blossomed above them, humans and Neurali's standing together on a station hull, guns raised. Below, Neurali's ships forming a shield wall around a battered human carrier. Another gesture. Another set of images, human boarding parties slamming into Neurali's cruisers, Marines pouring through smoking hull breaches, bodies tumbling into vacuum. In my lifetime, Sarai said, your people were myths, then pests, then rivals, then allies, then rivals again. You change shape faster than most species change governments. You bend technology until it screams, then pretend it was always supposed to work like that. You impress me, you frighten me, you are. As my daughter insists, infuriating and magnificent. A rare warmth softened her features when she spoke of Tallyra. It vanished quickly. The Harrow will drive us all to the edge, she continued. When we are cornered, how will humanity respond? Will you turn your guns on us, seize weakened systems, carve an empire from dying stars, or will you stand the line beside us until the last sun flickers? You expect me to answer for all of humanity, Amir said. I expect you to show me who you are, Sarai replied. And through you I will judge your kind. He almost laughed. That's not how we work. Then show me how you work. The starfield blinked out, the chamber went dark, the floor dropped. Amir had time for one startled gasp before he was falling, gravity vector snapping sideways. His training kicked in. He twisted, tucking his body, trying to orient. Light flared. He slammed hard into a new surface, rolled. Came up on one knee. He was in a different room, smaller, harsher. The air smelled of hot metal and antiseptic. A Neurali's soldier lay on a platform before him, armor scorched black, chest heaving. A translucent film covered a deep wound along his side, pulsing faintly. Alien medical instruments hummed around him, projecting streams of glyphs into the air. A human marine stood nearby, helmet off, face streaked with sweat and soot. Her eyes snapped to Amir. What the hell, who are you? She barked. Her English was like a slap after so much Neurali's. Amir stared. He recognized her. Captain Ray's 3rd Coalition Rapid Response, listed as missing in action on the Tethar front 6 months ago. This wasn't real. Couldn't be. A simulation then. A psychic construct. Sarai's test. He swallowed. Call me a witness. Don't care what you call yourself, Ray's snapped. You know field medicine. Enough, he said, stepping closer. The Neurali soldier's eyes fluttered open, focusing on him with difficulty. Do not waste time on me, the alien rasped in accented English. Seal the hatch. Harrow drones breached outer bulkhead. They will come. Ray's glared at him. This bastard was shooting at my people 10 minutes ago. Now he's the only one between us and a swarm breach. I need him alive long enough to tell me the Harrow's entry vectors, so fix him or move. The wound was bad. Amir saw burned flesh, shredded tissue, organs exposed to the chill air. Neurali's anatomy was only half familiar from training. He pressed his hand against the wound film. It was warm and slick, thrumming with strange bioelectrics. He felt for the rhythm beneath it, the alien's heartbeat fluttering too fast. Human, the Neurales croaked. Why care? Amir met his eyes. Because we're not done fighting yet. The room blurred, changed. He was in a corridor now, alarms wailing. Light strobing blood red. Harrow drones skittered along the walls, nightmare shapes of black metal and segmented limbs, mouths full of spinning teeth. Neurales warriors and human marines fought back to back, gunfire and plasma bursts intersecting in lethal geometries. A drone lunged for him. He moved on instinct, ducking under its snapping maw to slam the butt of an imaginary rifle into its sensory cluster. It screeched, recoiling, and he dove aside. He wasn't actually holding a weapon. In this space, his intent was enough. A voice boomed through the chaos. "Show me," Sarai thundered, echoing from everywhere and nowhere. When the wall breaks and the void looks back, what does humanity do? The scenes came faster then, flickering around him like visions. A human engineer barricading a corridor with her own body while civilians scrambled past. A Neurales medic dragging a wounded Terran through a collapsing bulkhead. A human admiral and a Neurales fleet commander screaming at each other over comms while, outside their windows, a Harrow construct the size of a moon tore stations apart like toys. Every time there was a choice: abandon allies, save one's own, cut and run, fight and die. The simulations offered the easy paths, the selfish ones. Amir felt the tug of survival, the old animal logic whispering that it wasn't his responsibility. But over and over, he saw human faces set in grim lines as they chose otherwise. He saw people who refused to leave anyone behind, even when it meant stepping into fire. He felt their fear, their stubborn hope, their bone-deep, infuriating refusal to accept that anything was inevitable. He was falling again. The visions collapsed into darkness. When light returned, he was back in the audience chamber, on his knees, palms pressed flat to the cool stone. Sweat dripped from his brow. His muscles trembled as if he'd run miles. Sarai sat on her bench, watching. "That was you," she said quietly. "Not history, not a predicted scenario. Your mind supplied those choices, that courage." He forced himself to his feet. "You asked who we are when things get bad, that's who. You chose sacrifice so easily," she murmured. "Why?" "Because we've learned," Amir said, voice rough. "Every time in our history we tried the other way, when we chose selfishness. Isolation, cruelty, we paid for it later. We taught ourselves that survival isn't just about living, it's about what kind of people stagger out of the ashes." Her gaze held his, sharp as a scalpel. Outside, thunder boomed again. The storm seemed closer now, lightning casting brief skeletons of light across the walls. Sarai exhaled slowly. "You speak like someone who expects to die for others." "I've been in enough battles to know I might," Amir said. "But I also know something else." "And what is that?" "That humans break," he said. "Bones snap, minds fracture, hearts stop, but we don't stay broken. We keep getting up, even when there's no logical reason left to do it." A faint, fierce smile touched her lips. "My scouts said something similar when they first observed your species. They called you the ones who get back up." "It's what we do," he said simply. The chamber's hum shifted. The hidden sensors seemed to reposition, focusing. Sarai leaned back slightly, studying him from a new angle, as if something had tipped in her internal calculus. "The Harrow will arrive at our borders within 2 standard cycles," she said. "If we stand apart, it will devour us piecemeal. If we stand together," she let the thought hang. "It might still devour us," Amir said, "but it'll break its teeth first." She snorted softly. "Your optimism borders on pathology." "It's contagious," he said. "Careful." For the first time she laughed. It was a low, rusty sound, as if unused muscles were remembering how. "You speak like my daughter," she said, infuriating, irreverent, impossible to ignore. He swallowed. "Where is she now?" "Pacing holes in my waiting hall, no doubt." A flicker of affection again. "I have kept her mind barred from this chamber. She does not know what you've just endured. She only knows that you entered, and that you may not leave." "Is this the part where you decide whether to kill me?" he asked, because sometimes humor was the only shield left. "If I wished you dead," Sarai said dryly, "you would never have stepped off your shuttle." Comforting, she stood. The subtle shift in her posture changed everything. Authority coalesced around her like a cloak. The air tingled against Amir's skin. "Amir of Earth," she said, voice suddenly formal. "I have tested you and found you troubling. Your species offends my sense of order. You are reckless, fragile, unpredictable. You burn through history like a lit fuse through dry fuel." And yet, she extended her hand. "You do not run from the dark. You light torches and march into it." For a heartbeat, he simply stared. Then he stepped forward and took her hand. Her grip was strong, calloused, warmer than he expected. "On behalf of my people," she said, "I propose a pact, Neurales fleets and human coalitions. Standing the line together, knowledge shared, firepower combined. My daughter insists that humanity is worth the risk. Today you have convinced me that she may be right." Emotion surged hot behind Amir's sternum. Then on behalf of humanity, he said carefully in her language, "I accept. We will stand with you against the Harrow, not as servants, not as masters, as stubborn equals." She nodded once. "I will send the signal to my admirals. You will send it to your coalition. For better or worse, our fates are now entangled." Thunder cracked overhead, shaking dust from the high ceiling. And as for my daughter, Sarai added, tone shifting, I will not forbid her from walking beside you. If she chooses a path with you, she does so with my eyes open. Amir exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Relief made his knees weak. Thank you, he managed. Do not thank me yet, she said. If you break her heart, I will break your planet. He believed her. A hidden door whispered open at the side of the chamber. Light spilled in from the corridor beyond. Talira stood there, hand braced against the frame, eyes wide. She took in the scene, their clasped hands, the faint signs of strain in Amir's stance, the subtle change in her mother's expression. Amir, she breathed. He turned toward her. For a moment, words failed him. He simply smiled. And in that smile, she seemed to read everything she needed. Sarai released his hand. At last, she said quietly, we are no longer alone. Headphone, if you're enjoying this story, take a second to like and subscribe. It really helps keep humanity's stories alive among the stars. The storm didn't let up. Hours later, the sky above the capital was still a roiling canvas of electric fury. Lightning walked the clouds in branching veins, sometimes reaching down to kiss the highest spires. The city responded in measured pulses, power grids rerouting, shields shimmering briefly. Inside the matriarch's private suite, the storm was a distant heartbeat. Amir stood by a broad window, watching sheets of rain cascade down the force field. Beyond it, the world was a blur of light and motion. He felt Talira's presence before he heard her footsteps. She moved like flowing water, even when she was exhausted. You should rest, she said, coming to stand beside him. The psychic trial takes a toll on your kind. You watched, he asked, her expression shifted. I felt something, a pulse like distant thunder. The wards kept the details from me. Mother plays her games. How mad is she? He said, half joking. That depends, Talira replied. How much did you argue with her? Enough. Then she is impressed. Talira's smile was small but real. She has agreed to the pact. She has, he said, on one condition. Her eyes narrowed, which is, that I not break your heart. Talira snorted, as if she could stop me breaking yours instead. He glanced at her. You plan on it, only if you deserve it, she said softly. They stood in silence for a while, watching the storm. Amid the thunder, Amir could hear the faint murmur of distant comms, ships being repositioned, patrol routes rewritten, supply chains realigned. The decision made in that chamber was already rippling outward, changing the shape of the galaxy in small, precise increments. You realize what this means, Talira said eventually, for both our people. It means the hero will have to work harder, Amir replied, and we'll have to be very careful not to shoot each other by accident. Humans and Neuralis on the same front lines, she mused. Our cultures entangling, our tactics merging, our songs colliding. With a faint smile, Mother will pretend to hate your music. She hasn't heard our battle playlists yet, he said. We make surprisingly good noise when the world is ending. I know, Talira murmured. I've heard you sing in a depressurized corridor with your lungs half frozen. He grimaced. You remember that, every note, she said. You sang to keep the others from panicking and to remind yourself that you were still alive. Humans sing when we're scared, he said. We shout into the dark so it knows we're still there. She studied him, something like awe in her eyes. It's infuriating. I'm sensing a theme, he said. She reached out, placing her hand over his heart. The heat of her skin bled through the thin fabric. You pulled my mother into your madness, she said. You convinced her that humanity's chaos is worth inviting into our order. She convinced herself, Amir said. I just showed her what we look like when we're cornered. And what do you look like? Talira whispered. He thought of the visions Sarai had pulled from him. Humans standing in breached corridors, bloodied and shaking, still passing ammo along the line. Engineers holding doors shut with their bodies while others escaped. A medic staying behind with a dying alien because no one deserved to die alone in the dark. We look like we always have, he said quietly. Tired, scared, stubborn. Talira's fingers curled in the fabric of his jacket. And you expect my people, the oldest empire on this side of the stars, who plan their dynasties in thousand-year cycles, to survive this alliance. I expect us all to survive because of it, he said, not in spite of it. She studied him for a long moment, then she leaned her head against his shoulder. The gesture was small, almost childlike, but in a culture where physical contact was reserved for blood and battle, it meant more than any oath. You are, she said, the worst mistake I have ever insisted on making. Likewise, he murmured. They stayed like that until Sarai's voice crackled over the room's comms node. Daughter, human, the stratagem awaits. Talira straightened immediately, slipping back into the poise of an air. Amir felt her spine go rigid, her eyes sharpen, the softness of a moment before folded away like a secret. Ready? She asked. No, he said honestly. But since when has that stopped us? The stratagem was carved into the spire's heart, a hollow sphere lined with layered displays. Stars hung in midair, suspended in rotating shells of data. Here the galaxy looked almost peaceful, tiny flames scattered in infinite dark. Sarai stood at the center, hands clasped behind her back. Around her, holographic avatars of Neurali's admirals and coalition commanders flickered into being. The air was dense with coded whispers. Translation algorithms, the hum of power. Amir took his place at one side of the matriarch. Talira moved to the other. He felt eyes, both virtual and physical, settle on him. This is the human. The voice belonged to Admiral Kethan of the Nerali's Fourth Fleet, his avatar a tall, imposing figure of pale violet light. The one you test in place of their entire species. Sarai's gaze cut through the assembled projections. This is Amir of Earth, she said. He has bled for our people. He has walked through death for mine. He is sufficient. A human admiral's avatar, Tersh Von, eyes sharp, jaw set, nodded once. I vouch for him, she said. He pulled my marines out of a collapsed station on Tethar while your ships held the line. We owe each other bodies. One body does not define a species, another Nerali's voice objected. No, Sarai agreed. But it reveals the stories they choose to live by. Amir lifted his chin. We don't need you to like us, he said into the humming silence. We don't always like ourselves, but we intend to live, and we intend that you live too, because if the harrow eats you, we'll be next, and because our best stories are the ones where we pull each other out of the fire instead of shoving each other in. There was a ripple in the projections, a subtle shift. You speak boldly, human, hissed a Calyx observer's avatar. Angular and crystalline, yet your species is young, fragile, limited. We're very good at making our limits someone else's problem, Amir said. Ask anyone who's tried to invade us. A few human avatars smirked, even some Nerali's approximations of amusement flickered. Sarai stepped forward. Enough posturing, she said. We face a devourer that leaves nothing but silence in its wake. The harrow does not negotiate, it does not gloat, it arrives, consumes, and moves on. We cannot intimidate it, we can only stand or fall. The projections shifted, the map of space zoomed, showing the creeping stain of harrow incursion. Nodes flared as lost outposts winked out. We will form a joint defensive lattice along these vectors, Sarai said, gesturing. Human stations and Nerali's bastions interlinked. Coalition carriers in our flanks, Nerali's dreadnoughts anchoring their lines. We will share data on harrow signatures. Adaptive strategies and countermeasures, we will bleed together. And if we fall, someone asked. Then we fall loud, Amir said quietly. So the galaxy remembers we were here. As plans spiraled outward, logistics, fleet compositions, evacuation contingencies, he felt something shifting beneath the numbers. Nerali's minds and human intellects intersected, arguments flaring, compromises forged. Centuries of imperial pride crashed into centuries of human improvisation, sparks flying. At one point, a Nerali's admiral dismissed a human tactic as suicidal improvisation. Yes, Tersh Von said calmly, that's why it worked. Later, a human suggested a leapfrogging retreat plan that would buy time at the cost of several border worlds. Talira cut in sharply, voice cold. We do not trade lives we have not yet asked to stand the line. We are not the harrow. For hours, they hammered strategy on the anvil of necessity. When at last the projections faded and the stratagem dimmed, Amir's head pounded. He felt stretched thin like a wire pulled near breaking. Around him, the others looked similar. Nerali's eyes dimmed, human faces drawn. Sarai dismissed the avatars with a nod. The room emptied, leaving only the three of them. You spoke well, she said to Amir. Too well for someone with so little rank. I've never been good at shutting up, he admitted. You spoke like someone with something to lose, she continued. That carries more weight than any title. Talira stepped closer to the sphere's center, looking up at the slowly rotating stars. We have set this path in motion, she said quietly. Now we must walk it, even if it leads into the harrow's mouth. Especially then, Amir replied, that's where we're needed. Sarai studied him, head tilted. Tell me, human. Are your people truly ready to die beside mine? He thought of Earth, of cities clinging to battered coastlines, of orbital habitats of junk repurposed into home, of children in the underlevels who learned constellations by the names of old satellites. No, he said, we're not ready, we're never ready, we go anyway. She smiled, slow and fierce. Good. The universe has enough creatures who wait for ideal conditions before acting. They are the fossils we find in dead systems. Preparations moved fast after that. The spire became a nerve center, its halls swarming with messengers, officers, diplomats. Human uniforms mingled with Nerali's robes, the clash of aesthetics sometimes comical, sometimes oddly beautiful. Translation nodes hummed overtime, struggling to keep up with the torrent of shouted orders and vitriolic arguments. Amir found himself at the junction of everything. He stood in docking bays as joint crews drilled emergency procedures, their curses and laughter blending. He sat in briefing rooms as new tactics were sketched on holo surfaces, erased, redrawn. He walked with Talira along narrow maintenance catwalks where the air smelled of ozone and lubricant, their shoulders brushing. Once he found himself wedged under a console with a Nerali's engineer and a human tech, all three of them elbow-deep in recalcitrant wiring. Do your systems even function? The engineer muttered, eyes glowing faintly as she interfaced with the circuitry. You wrap tape around broken conduits and call it a day. It's specialized structural integrity tape, the human tech protested. We did the math, you did an approximation and called it art. That's called engineering where I'm from, Amir said. The engineer blinked at him. Your species evolved in spite of yourselves. We had a lot of practice. He replied, through it all the storm outside never fully cleared. It became background music, a reminder that chaos was the default setting of the universe. Lightning flared against the spire's shields, each strike a whisper, time is short. The first Harrow contact came sooner than expected. Amir was in the communications hub, watching lines of data crawl across a holographic sphere when the alarms changed pitch. The usual pulsing alerts broke into a sharp, rising keening that made his teeth ache. Unknown mass displacement, a controller shouted. Sector Gamma 12, no hyperspace signature, it just appeared. The display updated, a new object hung in the void at the edge of human Neurali's joint space. It was wrong. Even as a simplified icon, it refused to resolve into a familiar shape. Sensors struggled to define its edges. It was like staring at a glitch in reality, a skipping frame in the film of existence. Magnify. Sarai commanded, appearing at Amir's side as if conjured. The view zoomed. The Harrow construct filled the display. It looked like someone had taken a starship, a coral reef, and a predatory animal and forced them through each other. Spines jutted at impossible angles. Cavities opened and closed along its surface like mouths. Bits of it seemed to dissolve and recombine in fractal loops. Space bent near its edges, light dragging. It's beautiful, someone whispered, horrified. Signal all stations, Sarai said. Red lattice, Harrow protocol. Orders cascaded outward, fleets shifted, nodes realigned. Joint Task Force Aegis snapped into motion, its ships turning toward the intruder like wolves orienting on a new predator. Amir felt his world narrow to immediate tasks, relaying updated vector plots, verifying civilian evacuation streams, filtering sensor noise. His fingers flew over interfaces, his breath shallow, beside him. Talira watched the incoming construct with a stillness that spoke of tightly leashed fury. They're early, she said. They're hungry, Amir answered. The first engagement happened light minutes away, invisible to the naked eye but all too clear in the data feeds. Human destroyers darted in, lancing the Harrow with beams of focused radiation. Neurali's cruisers lobbed gravity-shearing warheads. For a moment, fireworks blossomed across the construct's surface. Then it adapted. The next wave of fire vanished into twisting pockets of warped space. Weapon signatures were eaten, folded, redirected. Return fire lanced out in patterns no tactical algorithm had predicted. A Neurali's frigate winked out of existence, its hull smeared into nothing. A human carrier's shields failed in a pattern like peeling bark, sections of the ship simply ceasing to be. Losses mounting, someone said, voice flat. They are learning us. Good, Amir said through gritted teeth. Then they can be surprised. He slammed a new set of coordinates into the tactical overlay, rerouting a wing of coalition corvettes. Tersh Vaughn's avatar flickered into presence, eyes burning. You're suggesting we ram them, she demanded. Not exactly, Amir said. We slingshot around their gravity distortions. Let them chew on unmanned decoy hulls packed with overclocked warp cores. If they're trying to predict what we'll do, give them something we'd never survive doing in person. That's insane, a Neurali's admiral snapped. Yes, Amir said, but it'll only work once. Might as well use the surprise. Sarai watched him. Authorize it, she said. The decoy hulls launched. They were old ships, gutted freighters and retired patrol craft, hastily fitted with engines far too powerful for their frames. As they burned toward the Harrow construct, their hulls groaned, metal glowing at the edges. The Harrow shifted, strange limbs reorienting. It seemed to taste the newcomers, analyzing, preparing countermeasures. At the last moment, the decoys dove into the gravity lensing fields the Harrow had deployed. Space twisted. The decoys vanished from predictable paths. They reappeared inside the construct's perimeter, physics screaming. The detonation was more felt than seen. Space buckled, sensors glitched, half the displays in the stratagem went blank for a heartbeat. When they cleared, a significant chunk of the Harrow construct was simply gone, ragged edges curled inward, trying to reknit. For the first time, the intruder looked less like inevitable doom and more like a wounded animal. The room exhaled as one. They bleed, Talira said softly. They adapt, Sarai countered. Our trick will not work again. Then we'll find another, Amir said. His voice shook, but the words held steady. They did, over the next hours and days. The joint forces played a deadly game of improvisation. Every tactic that worked once became obsolete the moment the Harrow encountered it again. Humans and Neurali's and their allies were forced into constant creativity. Human pilots pushed their ships beyond safe parameters, inventing new maneuver profiles in real time. Neurali's minds wove complex psychic interference patterns, trying to confuse the Harrow's sensing algorithms. Engineers on both sides cannibalized systems, repurposing civilian infrastructure into makeshift weapons. On one moon, a human Neurali's team rigged an ancient mass driver to fling asteroids packed with antimatter charges. On another, volunteers stayed behind to overload planetary shields at the precise moment a Harrow tendril passed through, vaporizing it at the cost of their own lives. Through it all, stories spread. A Terran sergeant and a Neuralese tactician who held a pressure tunnel against boarding constructs for 14 hours, taking turns propping each other up when exhaustion made them collapse. A human medic who refused to leave a collapsing triage unit until every unconscious Neuralese had been tagged for retrieval, his last act triggering an automated evac system that saved them both. They were small stories set against cosmic horror, but they mattered. Because the hero fought with inevitability, with the cold logic of consumption, and humanity and those who chose to stand with them fought with something else. They fought with refusal. Amir found himself on the move constantly. One day he was on a Neuralese battleship, its corridors humming with alien harmonics, helping integrate human predictive algorithms. The next, he was on a battered coalition station, sitting on the floor with children from 3 species, telling them a story while their parents worked in the repair bays. They say no one can survive a night on Sol 9, he told them, gesturing as the station's gravity flickered. But a long time ago a human did, not because he was strong or smart or had the best gear, because he refused to let the planet decide his story for him. Did he beat the planet? A Atren child chirped, mandibles clicking. No, Amir said, he didn't conquer it. He found a way to live with it, to endure it. That's harder and more important. Later, when the alarm sounded and the station shuddered under Harrow fire, some of those children would hold fast to that story like a lifeline. On the worst day the Harrow reached the capital, it came not as a single monstrosity but as a swarm of smaller constructs, each adapted to a different task. Some burrowed into the outer defenses, chewing through shields and stone. Others floated in orbit, distorting space to prevent evacuation. Still others infiltrated the planet's communication grids, turning systems against their owners. The spire shook. In the stratagem, dust drifted from the ceiling, displays flickered. One by one, icons representing stations and ships winked out. We're losing the lattice, someone shouted. Reroute power from secondary, already done, but the Harrow is folding our grid into focus, Sarai snapped. Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. We hold this node or the line collapses. Outside the high windows, the sky was no longer just storm clouds. Harrow constructs descended like shards of living night, trailing gravitational distortions. Lightning crawled over their surfaces, drawn to their unnatural contours. The city's shields strained, luminous domes flaring. Amir felt fear clawing at his chest. This was it. The day the Harrow came with an atmosphere. The day the abstract threat became teeth at the door. He looked at Talira. She met his gaze, and in that moment they both saw reflected what they'd known from the beginning. This might be the last fight. Get to the secondary command node, Sarai ordered them. If this chamber falls, someone must maintain coordination. No, Talira said. Sarai's head snapped around. Daughter, I am heir, Talira said, eyes blazing. My place is at the heart. And mine, Amir added. Surprising himself, if the Harrow wants our center, it's going to find it busy. Sarai stared at them, fury and pride warring in her face. Outside, the sky burned. Very well, she said at last. We die together then, or we live together, Amir said. Harrow constructs breached the outer defenses. They came down like silent meteors, their surfaces writhing. Where they touched, matter screamed, buildings twisted, streets rippled as if made of liquid. People ran, fought. Were caught mid-motion and turned into smear patterns across unreality. The spire's shields flared, buckled, held. In the stratagem, the floor vibrated with impacts. Systems screamed warnings. Entire decks became red zones as environmental integrity faltered. Boarding constructs in the lower levels, a security officer cried. They're eating their way up. Seal bulkheads E30 through F9, Sarai ordered. Already sealed, the constructs are tunneling through the walls. They're learning us too well, Talira muttered. Then show them something new, Amir said. He looked at the tactical display. The Harrow was focused on the spire, drawn to the concentration of command signals. Ships in orbit were already compromised, their control systems infected. What if we give them what they want, he said slowly. But on our terms. Sarai's eyes narrowed. Explain. We let them through, he said. Drop the shields in a controlled corridor. Give them a path straight to us. Then we hit them with everything we have. No distractions, no trying to hold everywhere at once. You're suggesting we invite the devourer into our lungs, Talira said. There was no accusation in her tone, just a brutal kind of curiosity. Yes, Amir said, because we fight best when we can look what scares us in the face, because the Harrow is trying to spread us thin. We don't do thin, we do concentrated stubbornness. Sarai looked at the display, at the writhing icons, at the shrinking zones of safety. This is madness, she said. Probably, Amir replied, but it's our madness that matters. She studied him for a long heartbeat, then she turned to the security grid. Drop shield segments Gamma 12 through Gamma 16, she ordered. Reroute all internal defenses to those corridors. Tell every soldier, every civilian who can hold a weapon, fall back to the spire's heart. You're actually doing this, Talira murmured. If we die, Sarai said, we die on our feet. The shields flickered. Outside, Harrow constructs sensed the opening. They surged toward it, a dark tide. The battle that followed would be remembered in 3 languages and a dozen song traditions. In the lower corridors, humans and Neuralis fought shoulder to shoulder as the harrow poured in. The construct's warped gravity turned floors into cliffs, ceilings into pits. Soldiers adapted, using the distortions as cover, leaping from twisted surfaces at impossible angles. A human heavy gunner anchored one choke point, his weapon overheating, barrels glowing. When his ammo finally ran dry, he used the gun itself as a club, swinging until his arms gave out. A Neuralis warrior dragged him back, her psychic shield flaring as harrow tendrils lashed at them both. In another corridor, engineers turned coolant lines into impromptu cryo-weapons, freezing harrow appendages mid-lunge. Civilians passed ammunition hand to hand, their faces set in masks of fear and determination. Stories bloomed and died in seconds, acts of courage never seen by anyone beyond their immediate few. In the end, though, they all braided into one thing: resistance. At the heart of the spire, in the stratagem, the fight came to them. The first harrow construct breached the wall with no explosion. The stone simply parted, rolling away like liquid, leaving a perfectly smooth gap. Through it seeped a tendril of darkness, flickering with unsatisfied hunger. It was smaller than the constructs outside, but more focused. It tasted of cold logic and endless consumption. Sarai stepped forward, star-mapped robe billowing. Her mind flared, becoming a lance of emerald light in psychic space. The harrow recoiled as she struck, its surface rippling. Talira joined her, their combined wills forming a barrier that made the air hum. The harrow pushed back, reality squealing around them like stressed metal. Amir couldn't fight on that plane. His mind was loud but untrained, so he fought the way he knew. He grabbed a discarded rifle from a fallen guard, checked the charge, and fired into the creeping darkness. The energy beam vanished into the harrow mass, absorbed. But the construct hesitated, recalibrating. For a fraction of a second, its focus shifted. Sarai and Talira struck. Their minds hammered the construct, not as delicate psychic blades, but as blunt instruments of raw willpower. They pushed not just with Neuralis' discipline, but with something they'd learned from humanity: sheer, unyielding refusal. "You will not have this," Sarai's mind roared. "You will not have us," Talira's added. The harrow writhed. More tendrils pushed through the breach, seeking alternate angles. One brushed Amir's arm. Pain like liquid nitrogen poured through his nerves. His vision flared white. He smelled burning, not of flesh, but of something more abstract, the searing of probability itself. He dropped to one knee, teeth grinding. It would be so easy to let go, to fall into that cold, inexorable pull, to become part of the harrow's endless, senseless forward motion. No, the word wasn't a thought so much as a gut-deep shove. It came from every bruise he'd ever taken, every time he'd forced himself up off the ground when training screamed he was done. From the stories told in bunkrooms and bars and long, dark nights alone on watch. No, humans didn't conquer the dark by being stronger. They outlasted it by refusing to stop moving. He pushed. Something shifted. The harrow's tendril recoiled, leaving a smoking pattern on his sleeve. For a heartbeat, the construct itself stuttered. Its internal patterns glazing over. Talira felt it. Again, she shouted, sweat sheening her violet skin. Amir staggered forward, slammed his palm against the nearest harrow surface. Pain screamed up his arm. He dug deeper, past training, past fear. He thought of Earth, of storms tearing at fragile coastlines, of people building taller seawalls than learning to float, of deserts eating fertile land and communities turning to vertical farms, of cities bombed and rebuilt until they stopped bombing. He thought of every story humanity had ever told about the end of the world. How in nearly all of them someone survived. Someone crawled out of the ruins, coughing, and decided to keep going. He poured that into his touch. "We don't stop," he told the harrow, not with words, but with the stubborn pattern of his entire species. "We break, we heal, we break again, we keep standing. You don't know what to do with that, do you?" The harrow hesitated. In that hesitation, Sarai and Talira struck with everything they had left. Their psychic assault folded the construct's local processes in on themselves. The harrow not writhed, shuddered, then imploded, withdrawing into a point so small it was almost imaginary before vanishing in a soundless burst. Silence crashed down, the breach in the wall sealed, stone flowing back into place. The air tasted of ozone and something metallic. Amir collapsed, lungs heaving. Hand was a ruin of burned nerve endings, fingers twitching. Talira dropped beside him, catching his shoulders. Her face swam in his vision, eyes bright with pain and something fiercer. "Idiot," she whispered, "glorious, infuriating idiot." "Did we win?" he rasped. For this moment, Sarai said, voice weaker than he'd ever heard it. She leaned heavily against the bench, star-map robe scorched. "The harrow has retreated, that construct at least. Others still gnaw at the edges." But she looked up at the displays. The tactical map had changed. Where before the harrow incursion had been a solid tide, now it was fraying. Joint forces were pushing back, small pockets of resistance blooming into liberated nodes. The improvisational tactics humans had seeded were catching on, being adapted, refined. Messages began to flood in, overlapping. held the line at lost 2 ships but the Harrow, they broke off. As if confused, human ground forces refused to retreat even when, song in the trenches they sang in the Harrow. Amir let the sounds wash over him. Each fragment was a small light. They are learning from us, Talira murmured, not just the Harrow, our allies. They're learning that inevitability can be resisted, Amir said. Do not grow complacent, Sarai cautioned. The Harrow is not defeated, it is considering, reevaluating. Good, Amir said. Let it think, we'll keep acting. He forced himself up to sit, ignoring the protests of his body. Talira stayed close, one hand steady at his back. Sarai regarded him, eyes unreadable. When I first saw your species, she said slowly, I thought you would burn yourselves out before you ever reached us. Now I see that burning is how you live. We're working on better metaphors, he said, lips twitching. Do not, she said. You remind the universe that entropy does not have to be a straight line, that matters. Outside, the storm finally began to break. Clouds thinned, revealing patches of sky tinged with the faint colors of dawn. The spire's shields flickered, then steadied. Emergency sirens quieted, replaced by the distant clatter of rebuilding. In the days that followed, the Harrow did not vanish. It continued to probe, to test, to adapt. But now it faced a coalition that refused to stand still. That met each new horror with a new act of defiance. Joint memorials were held for the dead. Human names and Nerali's designations were spoken in the same breath. Children from both species played together in the battered plazas beneath the spire, turning broken Harrow fragments into toys and art. Stories spread faster than official communiques. They spoke of a matriarch who invited a human into her private chamber and found her empire changed. Of a daughter who risked her inheritance on love and strategy in equal measure. Of a man from a storm-scarred world who walked into alien halls with his heart in his hands and his species on his shoulders, and refused to put either down. On distant stations, Marines told a tale of a battle in a spire where the Harrow itself met a word it had never understood before, no. Amir healed slowly. His hand never quite regained full sensation. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between crises, he would stare at the faint scars and think of the cold he'd felt when the Harrow touched him. He wasn't special, he knew. Any number of others had done as much or more. But he had been there in that chamber when a line was drawn, not in space but in the stories the galaxy told about itself. One evening, as the newly clear sky bled into stars, he and Talira stood on a balcony high on the spire. The city glittered below, its wounds half hidden by reflected light. Above, orbital traffic glowed, human ships and Nerali's vessels and others besides, moving in a complex dance. You realize this isn't the end, Talira said, leaning on the balcony rail. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the faint scent of wet stone and ionized air. The Harrow will come back, stronger, stranger. I know, Amir said. Other threats will emerge, she continued. Old empires rarely embrace change quietly. There will be those among my people and yours who resent this alliance, who see profit in our failure. I know that too, she turned to him, eyes luminous in the half-light. Then why do you look at the sky like you've already won? He studied the stars for a moment, the way they clustered and scattered, unbothered by the struggles crawling beneath their light. Because we're still here, he said quietly. Because today we didn't break, we bent, we bled, but we're still standing. That's a kind of victory the Harrow doesn't understand. Talira considered that. You truly believe that endurance is enough? No, he said, but it's where everything else starts. She stepped closer, so close he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. You dragged my people into your endless stubbornness, she said, not without affection. Do you ever regret it? He thought of the faces they'd lost, the systems that would never shine again. The children who now played under rebuilt domes instead of open skies. I regret every death, he said, but not the choice. I'd rather stand with others and fall than survive alone in a universe full of ghosts. She smiled, fierce and soft all at once. Sometimes, she murmured, I think the universe made humans just to annoy the end of all things. Then it worked, he replied. Below them the city lights brightened as night deepened, across the galaxy. In countless stations and ships and settlements, beings of all kinds settled into uneasy rest. Some stared at the stars with fear, others with defiance, more than a few with wonder. The Harrow drifted in the dark between systems, its vast processes turning. It had expected easy meals, predictable resistance. The usual pattern of escalation and collapse it had encountered in other forgotten galaxies. Instead, it had found creatures who broke their own tools to make new ones mid-battle, who altered tactics faster than its predictive models could comfortably assimilate, who sang when afraid, who told stories not of inevitable defeat but of improbable survival. It adjusted, of course. That was what it did, it adapted. But in some distant corner of its distributed awareness, a new variable had appeared. A stubborn, flickering thing that did not fit neatly into reductionist equations. It was not hope. The Harrow did not feel hope. It was not fear. The Harrow did not fear. It was simply uncertainty. On a balcony high above a healed but not healed city, Amir of Earth and Talira of the Nerali's watched the stars together. We keep going, he said. Yes, she agreed. We keep going. Thunder rumbled one last time on the horizon, more memory than storm. The sky above remained clear, somewhere out there at the edge of human sight in Nerali's reach. The harrow turned its attention toward new strategies, new horrors. It would come. When it did, it would find something waiting that it could not fully consume, something messy, fragile, infuriating, something human. And that day the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, thank you for listening. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.